Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Congratulations, we've made it through another week of political upheaval. Now less than 4 weeks until Election Day. So today we have good, bad, and crazy martinis for you. And Jim, for our good martini, we head down to the great state of Florida. We mentioned yesterday that Milton was not as powerful as once feared. It was being talked about as one of those once-in-a-lifetime storms. For some folks along the Gulf Coast and other places in Florida, it's really, really bad, and there has been some loss of life, so we certainly don't want to minimize it, but thankfully, it got a little bit weaker as it came ashore. Still a Category 3, not quite as devastating as initially feared. Yesterday, Ron DeSantis, the governor, all over the place. He's, of course, been pretty much going nonstop for the past few weeks, ever since Hurricane Helene came ashore around the Big Bend up there in northern Florida. And so he's got a lot of things on his plate, trying to keep the people updated, taking questions from the media. And of course, he's got to take multiple questions about climate change and the role that climate change allegedly played in this particular hurricane. First of all, he said, I don't believe the people who think that there are government officials who are engineering the hurricanes and steering the hurricanes. And I also don't think this hurricane's the result of us using fossil fuels, which certainly doesn't make the left very happy. But as he answered this question, he demonstrates the ability to have command of the subject, which in Florida is critical. So we're going to look at this in a couple of ways. First, his command of history and his command of policy and response when it comes to hurricanes. First of all, him explaining that actually the worst hurricanes in Florida history happened a long time ago.
How does this storm rate in kind of the history of storms? I think it hit with a barometric pressure of, what was it, about 950 millibars when it hit, which I think if you go back to 1851, there's probably been 27 hurricanes that have had so the lower the barometric pressure, the stronger it is. I think there have been about 27 hurricanes that have had lower barometric pressure on landfall than Milton did. And of those, 17 occurred, I think, prior to 1960. And the most powerful hurricane on record since the 1850s in the state of Florida occurred in the 1930s, the Labor Day hurricane. Barometric pressure on that was 892 millibars. It totally wiped out the Keys. We've never seen anything like it, and that remains head and shoulders above any powerful hurricane that we've ever had in the state of Florida. The most deadly hurricane we've ever had was in 1928. The Okeechobee hurricane killed over 4,000 people.
So there's the encyclopedic history. Do you think President Biden or most politicians are going to know the millibars on a hurricane from decades ago? But then he also talked about how, yes, there's more damage now because there's more people here. There's more property built up, so that damage is going to be worse. But we've also improved our response, including this.
But what's also changed is our ability to do the prevention, to pre-stage the assets. I mean, we never did the pre-staging of power assets until I became governor. Now people expect that, but that wasn't what was done in the past. That's why people would be out with power for 3 weeks when we'd have hurricanes. We thought that that's not good. Now we have to pay to get these guys to come in, but my view is the quicker you get everyone hooked up, the better off the economy is going to be anyway. So why don't we just do that?
Why don't we just do it? So they do it, and that's why the response, among other reasons, is so good there. So, Jim, from understanding the issue backwards, forwards, inside and out, to common sense solutions to get people's lives back up as quickly as possible. All my family members on my wife's side are back up with power and everything very quickly within a few hours. I mean, this is competence on display, and we need so much more of this.
First of all, Greg, listening to DeSantis' first statement there, my understanding is that even Nate Silver said, wow, that's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of data, all just to recite off the top of your head. I was reminded, as he was describing it and going into such intricate detail, I was reminded of a friend of mine who passed away a few years ago named Kevin Berners, kind of a gadfly-ish ultimate Wisconsin politics guy. The old saying was, find somebody who loves you the way Kevin Berners loves Wisconsin. I always used to say Kevin Berners was my Wisconsin guy, and he'd give you 110% of 120% of what you needed to know. everything you needed to know, and then some more. You're like, okay, I got it. That's fine. That's kind of the way Ron DeSantis talks about the weather. You got it. It's right, and I'm glad he mentioned that phenomenon of the increasing cost of destruction, because when you look, first of all, there are certain parts of the country you're going to get hit by a hurricane sooner or later. Maybe it's going to be 5 years. Maybe it's going to be a decade. Maybe you'll be lucky and have a long stretch where my parents live near Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. That little inner part of South Carolina generally had a really good long stretch, and they've had a little less luck lately. But if you live in the Gulf Coast, you live in Florida, you live in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, sooner or later you're going to get hit by a hurricane. And if you have beachfront property, you got your dream home out there looking over the ocean, your house is probably going to get some damage. The winds, the wave, the high waters, all that kind of stuff. So if you have a $5 million house and a hurricane comes along and demolishes it, and you have to rebuild it, and you rebuild it at the cost of $10 million because, one, inflation, and two, well, if you're rebuilding the house, you want everything to be as, state of the art. You want to build the value of that. The second hurricane comes along, it's going to do more damage. It doesn't necessarily mean the storm is any more powerful or destructive or anything. It's just the value of what's in front of the storm has increased dramatically than the last one 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So it's just this is a good martini, Greg, but I'm not, maybe it's Friday, maybe it's because I'm, heading for some travel the next couple of days. This makes me angry that Ron DeSantis didn't get more of a consideration in the Republican presidential primary. Oh, he's kind of dweebish. Oh, he wears those goofy boots. Honest to God, oh, would it be nice to have a potential Republican nominee and a president who knows what they're talking about, who reads the briefing books, who remembers what they're briefed? I just, DeSantis, you deserve more consideration than you got this year.
Always on message, always in command. In terms of the gotcha questions from reporters, he's always ready for it. There was the follow-up. What about the fact that these hurricanes were so close to each other in time? And he's like, were you here in 2004? There was one practically every week or two throughout the summer. That was when so many different hurricanes came slashing through in different parts of Florida. And so he's ready. He's ready for the argument because he knows the issues so well. All right, well, let's talk about Z-biotics, because if you're trying to ask a gotcha question to Ron DeSantis, you got to get up even earlier in the morning than he does, and then he's still going to get you. So you're going to want a drink at the bar that night when you try to figure out how your gotcha question went horribly wrong. But if you're going to do that, take Z-biotics first, because I promise you, when you wake up with your next stupid gotcha question, you're going to feel much better than if you didn't take Z-biotics first.
Z-biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as I'm sure you always do, and you will feel your best the next morning.
As I've mentioned many times, I've got the colleague, knew his limits. All of a sudden, as he aged, all of a sudden, the next morning didn't feel that great. Tried Z-biotics, and all of a sudden, those limits were right back where they should be. Felt perfect the next day. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, we just talked a little bit earlier in this week about how the Dems claim to be the party of norms and traditions and laws and precedents and defenders even of the Constitution, even though there seems to be a left-wing editorial every few weeks talking about how the Constitution is the problem.
Yeah, defenders of the Constitution other than the First Amendment, Second Amendment. You think of the NSA stuff, I guess, Fourth Amendment. Certainly not the 10th Amendment. They're still pretty good on the third, right? They haven't told us we have to put British troops in our homes.
That's true. That's true.
So they got that going for them.
Yeah, they hate Article 3, though. They don't like the way the judiciary is currently constructed. But nonetheless, one of their biggest issues ever since January 6th has been, look, you want people who are going to respect the will of the voters, who are going to acknowledge who won the election. And that's where we stand head and shoulders above the Republicans. Unless the Republicans win. Axios with the story here. House Democrats railed against House Speaker Mike Johnson for hedging on whether a GOP-controlled House would certify a Kamala Harris victory. But some of their senior members are playing a similar game. Those Democrats are trapped between their deep distrust of Donald Trump and their vigorous denunciations of any election challenges in the years since the January 6th attack. Democratic leaders, however, seem fully prepared to certify a Trump victory, making potential dissenters a small minority. Jamie Raskin, the House Oversight Committee ranking member and former January 6th committee member, who objected to Trump electors in 2017, mind you, told Axios in an interview that if Trump, quote, won a free, fair, and honest election, then we would obviously accept it, unquote. However, Raskin said he, quote, definitely doesn't assume that Trump would use free, fair, and honest means to secure a victory. Says Trump's doing whatever he can to try to interfere with the process, whether we're talking about manipulating electoral college counts in Nebraska or manipulating the vote count in Georgia or imposing other kinds of impediments. You know, things like voter ID and so forth. The Nebraska legislature tried to end the idea of awarding electoral votes by who carries each congressional district in addition to the two for statewide. That didn't work. So we're right back where we were on that. So for a guy who's already had a meaningless challenge in 2017 and Democrats who don't believe Bush won in 2000, and a lot of them also didn't believe that Bush won in 2004, including Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, who's quoted in this article. I mean, there's a lot of people here pretending to be holier than thou that don't really have a good track record to stand on.
Greg, I know that a lot of people's memories in politics are like an Etch-a-Sketch, where something really elaborate can be there, and then one little shake-up and they forget it's all gone. It all disappears. But a lot of us remember like 8 years of George Bush being considered selected, not elected, that the Supreme Court had made him president, and that there was, secret, warehouses of ballots that would prove that Al Gore had really won the election. And then in 2004, when George W. Bush won the popular vote, even that wasn't legitimate because of the Diebold machines. And this, every bit as far-fetched and cockamamie a conspiracy theory as Venezuelan hackers or Chinese bamboo in the Arizona ballots and the complaints from Trump in 2020. Apparently even John Kerry genuinely said years later that he had doubts about whether he had really lost the election, and that because of these sinister Diebold machines. Now, I know there are a bunch of Democrats who look, oh, well, that was just the fringe. That was just, weirdos. Like, I think probably didn't Howard Dean say something about, like, it really wasn't weirdos. There were big name Democrats who doubted the legitimacy of the 2000 and 2004 elections. And I know that there are a bunch of like, well, it's nothing like January 6th. Okay, but each time this happens, it makes it easier and it enables the other side. Right? So I suppose you could say, well, after January 6th, we can't be surprised that Democrats themselves are saying, well, we're not going to certify it because we just don't believe there's any way Donald Trump could legitimately win the election. I would point out that once you do that, you've become the monster you set out to slay. You are now exhibiting exactly the behavior you've spent the last 4 years denouncing. If there's some genuine, really legitimate reason to doubt the results of a state's election, then it's a different story. But it's a very high bar to clear. Everybody who does these things are professionals. There were a whole bunch of times last time where like Republican state officials were saying, yes, these are certified results. Biden won our state. It stinks, but that's the way it is. And there were people saying, oh, no, we can't. It's the exact same thing for Democrats this time around. And I don't know if these House Democrats really get just how corrosive they are, how damaging they are, because they've demonstrated everything we said over the last 4 years. We will drop at the drop of a hat for the advantage, because we never want to acknowledge that the other guy who we hate could possibly win a legitimate election, right? Yes, Trump is an accelerant. Trump, made this a much bigger deal in 2020 when he insisted that he had legitimately lost the election. But he was not the first figure to say, I was not the true loser of this election. There was cheating. There was, the ballot results you saw are not the real ones. There's some secret stockpile of my votes that were never counted. That was true in 2004. It was true in 2000. We cannot be surprised that the other side starts adopting the he cheated whining that the other side does.
There's a process in place that was being followed. Obviously, the violence of January 6th marred everything in a significant way. But you need a House member to make a motion and a Senate member to agree to that motion. And then the chambers separate to debate. And invariably, they're going to overwhelmingly reject these challenges. In 2000, because it was a 50-50 Senate, Trent Lott promised equal representation on committees. if the Democrats in the Senate didn't go along with all the cockamamie challenges on the House side. And so none of them actually advanced to the point of being voted on in the House or Senate. I remember Maxine Waters eventually, after never getting a second, saying, I don't care if there's a second from the Senate. And Gore, who had to chair the whole thing because he was vice president, said, well, the rules do care, which was one of his finer moments. Then in 2004, Barbara Boxer said she was ashamed that she didn't join any of those protests in 2000. So she actually did join the House protests, and they did go to those separate sessions, and they were overwhelmingly rejected in 2004. And so this idea that the Democrats are the ones who don't let the shenanigans go forward is utterly ridiculous. But in fact, Jan Schakowsky in 2005, she objected to George W. Bush, saying of Trump, now, I don't know what kind of shenanigans he's planning. We would have to, in any election, make sure that all the rules have been followed. But if a Republican says that, well, they're upending democracy. So good times, Jim. Good times. I'm sure it'll all go well.
Greg, I'm just glad you got another chance to do an Al Gore impression.
That was a perk. That was a perk of telling that story. But anyway, today's 3 Martini Lunch is brought to you by BetterHelp. And look, if the evidence is overwhelming that your guy lost the election and you still push forward with these stupid challenges, maybe you need some help, and maybe BetterHelp is the way to go. But honestly, October, season of masks and costumes, and sometimes I don't know what you're trying to hide, but it's not good to do that long term, whether you're struggling personally, professionally, or just overwhelmed by the doom scrolling on social media, whatever it is. Make sure you get help if you need help. BetterHelp, all therapists there are licensed, accredited professionals, and they allow you to connect with them in a safe and convenient online environment. It's also affordable to pay a low flat fee for both live sessions as well as messaging with your therapist because it doesn't have to be expensive. It's also convenient. You can do it at your own time and your own pace. Communicate with your therapist as often as you want and whenever you feel it is needed. Also, just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. You and I have not been excited about doing this particular story because there are so many other things to cover, and some of the allegations obviously are distasteful, but they keep coming. And we know that if they were coming towards a Republican candidate, certainly on the national ticket or even their spouses, then, well, they'd be getting a lot of coverage. So Doug Emhoff is the husband of Kamala Harris. They've been married for about 10 years now. We knew several weeks ago that his first marriage broke up because he had an affair with the nanny who was also one of his kids' teachers, got her pregnant. We're still not really sure what happened with that pregnancy, whether there was an abortion or not. Now, in the last few days, there are more stories out, including that Doug Emhoff, with a previous girlfriend between his first marriage and before he started dating Kamala Harris, was in Cannes because he's a big entertainment lawyer. She allegedly started flirting with someone in public at the Cannes Film Festival, and he slapped her vigorously across the face. And then there's also been reports out from, I think it was the UK Sun, which you got to take a little bit with a grain of salt, but it seems relatively well sourced, that he was pretty much a sexist pig in the office of his LA law firm, misogynist, hired a model just because he wanted someone attractive around. And if you didn't respond to his flirtatiousness in the office, well, your career there wasn't going to last too long. But this issue came up vaguely in an interview that Emhoff did with Joe Scarborough on MSNBC. And here's how that went.
In spreading it about you, saying that tabloid stories about your personal life, saying it should be front and center. He's saying it about your wife and making incredibly crude and lewd suggestions about her past life. I'm just curious. I know I seem like a very zen, mindful person, but I think I'd be pissed off. And I'm just wondering, how do you all stay centered? How do you stay disciplined and not really go off and not really push back hard at these things?
We don't have time to be pissed off. We don't have time to focus on it. It's all a distraction. It's designed to try to get us off our game.
Does it get you off your
game? No. All we are doing, all we talk about is this election. We understand the stakes. We understand the responsibility.
What are
we
the
understand
stakes?
the account.
What are the stakes?
Our very country, our future. What kind of future are we going to have?
Now, if Scarborough was any sort of journalist, Jim, he would have actually asked him to respond to the allegations instead of, oh my goodness, how are you dealing with all this? And then Emhoff just simply refers to them as distractions, not denying them, not getting any more specific on that, but trying to move on. So what do you make of this exchange?
Well, before we dive into Doug Emhoff, let's point out he makes a reference to her past life, meaning Kamala Harris's as well. I assume this is a reference to Kamala Harris and her well-documented extramarital affair with then San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. Like, this is not in dispute. She's never denied it. This was in the San Francisco newspapers all the time. Apparently, Brown and his wife were either in the process of getting a separation, on the way to divorce. I don't know whether you feel like that, mitigates the morality of it or what it is. There is a video report from the 1990s about a profile of Willie Brown. And they're about his, luxurious lifestyle and, surrounded by attractive women. Kamala Harris appears in it. And she's being interviewed and she says, no, I'm not his daughter. Which, A, tells you a bit about the age difference. Two, again, I'm going to take this podcast into directions Greg doesn't want to go. Kamala Harris back then was a attractive young woman. Credit, not the least bit surprising. She turned heads and got some, This is not a chapter of her life she's ever talked about in any significant degree. You assume she has a certain amount of mortification. I've heard people make the argument, look, Brown eventually put her on 2 commissions, and it's believed that this certainly didn't hurt her career or anything like that. This is all documented. Whether it's relevant to the decision of Kamala Harris and whether she should be president today, I think it isn't, but I also think that is part of her past, and I don't think it's outlandish or wild or crazy to bring this up. But let's talk more about Doug Emhoff. Well, first of all, as you noted, he's admitted to the affair with the babysitter or the nanny. Once you've admitted something, it's not an allegation. It is now part of your record. Second thing, the argument about him slapping around his ex, that is now, Daily Mail stands by its sources. They have very specific, they got the time, they got the place. Can we compare this to the Brett Kavanaugh allegations?
Right.
Like Brett Kavanaugh, this was front and center, and we got everything that was, including Swetnick. And that was reported, TV. This is all about the man who would be the first gentleman of the United States. You can't find a peep about this in any mainstream public. You'd think somebody would have reported on it to dispel it. Alternately, they did attempt to report on it to dispel it and figured out that they could not. Third thing, you mentioned about the law firm. I hope that Doug Emhoff is as good a husband to Kamala Harris as he appears to be, or as if the stories are. That's great. That's wonderful. Maybe he's a better man now than he was earlier in his life. Lots of people do this. From the beginning, I kind of went, oh God, he's just the nicest guy. He's so sweet. He was one of the most high-powered and high-paid lawyers in Hollywood. That's not a town that's known for cultivating easygoing, nice friend. And if anything Hollywood is known for, it's the constant respectful treatment of women. So the idea, if nothing else, now you could be a professional cutthroat and still be a very nice guy. I think those are pretty rare, but let's just, all of this portrait, the idea that Jen Psaki goes on her MSNBC show and talks about Emhoff as this new role model of masculinity. Now, both of you and I are wife guys. Mrs. Columbus is fantastic, and I want to be the world's biggest cheerleader of Mrs. Garrity. She's phenomenal. And there's some people, I think you could say the husbands of today are really, we love our wives, we love rooting for our wives. Their victories are our victories. We want to see our wives, that's all great. But in the end, he still knocked up the nanny. You can't be that much of a remarkable new paradigm of masculinity and a supportive husband when that's how the first marriage ended, okay? And then this other thing, look, most guys know you never lay hands on a woman. You just don't. Even if she's flirting with some other guy at the bar, even if you're really mad. And then to do it in public, and then to do it in, that's the thing that's kind of fascinating. This is what kind of gives this vibe back to the Harvey Weinstein scandal. This notion that everybody knew and that certain people, once they achieved a certain level of power and status, the rules didn't apply to them. And when it happened, nobody complained. Nobody did anything about it. During the height of the Me Too movement, Terry Crews, who I assume a decent number of listeners are familiar, huge, muscular African-American guy, talked about being sexually harassed by a gay man, by a high-powered Hollywood executive at a party. Now, in almost any other situation, if you mess with Terry Crews, that's the end of you. You are not going to live to tell, you're not going to live to tell that tale. But this guy was so powerful. Not only did Terry Crews not react the way you'd expect any guy who's heterosexual and doesn't want to be sexually harassed, getting sexually harassed by a gay man, he didn't even name the guy years later. That's omerta that the mafia is like, whoa, that's chilling. That's messed up. And so this is the environment Doug Emhoff is working on. Really? He was always this perfect gentleman and that he wouldn't do something like this? Okay, just it's a little bit hard to believe. And the idea, the rush to assure us that Doug Emhoff is the nicest guy ever makes me a little bit suspicious that perhaps he wasn't always the nicest guy ever. He's got this dirty laundry in his past, and we can't possibly know about it because it has to be that he's a great guy and that Kamala Harris is terrific, and they're both the most wonderful people ever, and they're going to become the first woman president, first gentleman of all time. Like there are certain things like too big to fail. They are too big to have the ugly side of their past discussed in public.
No, that's entirely correct because, the fawning is not working to the extent that the media would want. So they certainly don't want to spend time criticizing Harris or Walz or Emhoff more than they have to just to save face in these situations. And so we'll see. We'll see what happens over the next 3.5 weeks here. But it's not going to get any tougher coverage of them over the next 3.5 weeks. I can tell you that much.
One other point on Doug Emhoff coverage. So apparently he was doing campaign events with Tim Walz. They do some event in some cafe or restaurant or store. They order something. Both of them say they didn't bring their wallet. Now, I know, first of all, and I'm sure some other aide found money and paid for the bill or something like that. Greg, interesting kind of, test for all of our listeners. Greg, how often do you leave the house without your wallet?
Never.
No, me neither. Maybe
if I work in the yard or something, but actually, need to drive.
Cash, driver's license, credit cards, pass for the gym, everything I need is in there. If I ever lose my wallet, I am absolutely screwed. It is always in the pants from the day before. But I just don't leave the house without my wallet. You've reached a certain level of status, you are truly American aristocracy when you leave your house without a wallet because you don't need it because somebody else picks it up. You're never at a point where you need to take out your credit card to refill the gas in your car. By the way, when's the last time Doug Emhoff put gas in his car? When's the last time Tim Walz put gas in his car, right? You don't bring your wallet, it means somebody else is there taking care of the details of your life. So is this a reason to vote against him? No, and I just thought it was very revealing that not one, but both of them didn't bring their wallet when they were out for a day of campaigning.
Perfect metaphor for the left. Just do what you want.
That's the
Somebody
other
else will pay for it. Yeah. So, Jim, on that note, have a great weekend. Enjoy your new interim coach, and we'll see you on Monday.
I will see you Monday, American. Remember, bring your wallet.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks very much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They really help us out a lot. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend and join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.